Hello, good afternoon. Happy Monday. I hope everyone had a fantastic Thanksgiving. I want to talk today about innovation. Especially in this era of COVID, I'm hearing this word more and more, companies saying they need to innovate, they need to deal with the change in the world and make sure they keep up. And the truth is that innovation is a discipline that organizations have to invest in and really think about how to cultivate to make sure it's really going on within their company. It's not some magic dust you can sprinkle on everything and make everything automatically innovative. But there are a number of proven practices that we've worked with for decades that really make the difference between whether companies are effectively innovating or not. And we've studied many companies that are awesome at innovating, whether that's in the pharmaceuticals space or the life sciences or consumer packaged goods space, software and high tech space. And we've also worked with a lot of companies that are struggling to innovate. And I got to tell you, it's 10 key basic things that we see over and over that when more of these practices are implemented that I'm going to talk about today, there's more innovation. And when they're not practiced, there's just not the right ingredients for innovation to naturally grow. And by the way, that doesn't mean it's impossible. Just like sometimes an amazing flower will grow in the middle of your lawn, even though you didn't plant it and you didn't fertilize it and you didn't water it, nothing happened. And somehow it happened anyway. But if you really want a great garden, you don't just wait for chance, right? There's a number of things you can do to make sure that you get a great garden, or at least make it extremely likely that you will. Get the right soil, get the right fertilizer, get the right seeds, plant them in the right way, water them, cultivate them, etc. Doesn't mean every single seed you plant is going to be a beautiful flower. But if you do it the right way, you should have a garden you can be plenty proud of. And I think that innovation is a lot like that as well. So I want to talk a little bit about just very high level what we even mean, because of course, innovation is one of those words I like to sometimes refer to my useless words, right? Words like strategy or brand or roadmap. And you can argue innovation is one of those words as well. Someone says, we need innovation here. And someone says, what do you mean? We already have innovation. I mean, do you not have innovation? I mean, on one level, it's just a label, right? But I'm going to give you a quick definition of what I think innovation is. And it's actually pretty simple and why it's important. And then I want to dive in and just spend our time today very quickly. We're not going to have too much time to dive into every one of these things. Just talk about the 10 practices and give you a tool that you can use within your organization to say, well, what is our level of maturity? How much are we doing each of these individual practices? Because when you add all that up, it really tells you what your level of maturity is as an organization. So let's dive in. So let me switch to some slides here. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank my colleague Bob Taylor from the Digital Transformation Agency for this slide to say, well, when we talk about innovation, why do we need to innovate? What's the point? What's the purpose of innovation? And what he says, and I think this is spot on, is that there's really four main goals of innovation. The first is to differentiate. Differentiation is one of the main ways that we both gain new customers by doing something different from our competitive set, the way we stand out, the way we keep our existing customers because we have something that our competitors don't have, the way that we get word of mouth, the way that we create the opportunity to charge a premium by doing something a little different, a little better, or maybe a lot different or a lot better than what others are doing who are trying to solve the same basic customer problem that our business is solving, whether it's window washing or cardiology, right? Whatever it is, if you're doing something a little better, my daughter's oral surgeon, actually, several of my kids have had tooth stuff going on lately. So I've been at this oral surgeon's office a lot. And, even during COVID, he's got an amazing office. He's got really friendly staff. He's got amazing music. When my daughter went in to have her wisdom teeth out, the whatever you call it, the assistant or nurse or whatever you say in an oral surgeon's office said to her, okay, honey, what do you want on your Pandora playlist during the surgery, right? So she's going to ask my daughter her favorite musical artist so she can make sure there's a Pandora playlist. See, now that's not the sort of thing you get at most dentists or oral surgeons. Not a complicated thing, but something a little different. So the opportunity to differentiate. The second is to grow. Now, you might say, but won't differentiation help us grow? Yeah, potentially, but even separate from differentiating, sometimes you need to innovate just to grow. I mean, look at what's happening to some companies dealing with COVID, where the demand as a result of this change in our world has increased the demand on their business, right? Whether that's toilet paper or some areas of healthcare and medicine or all kinds of interesting different things, sports equipment, all kinds of different areas have seen huge growth as a result of changing lifestyles in this era of COVID. And Well, sometimes if you need to ship out 2 or 3 times as many widgets as you used to, you got to figure out a different way of doing things. You can't necessarily keep doing it the same way. Or if you want to grow into new markets, you may need to come up with new and different ways of doing things. So just to grow sometimes requires innovation. The third is to evolve, right? So evolve means really think about what's the next stage for your business. Differentiate might just mean, like I said before, coming up with a little bit different and better way of giving the same basic product or service. Evolve is more about saying, people's needs may be changing in a more dramatic way. Is there some completely new product or service I need to be offering? Is there a completely new payment model, a completely new distribution method, a completely new delivery method that I need to be looking at to meet potential future needs, to really evolve my company or my products or my services to a whole other level? So it's kind of like the much bigger version of differentiated way. And then lastly is to attract talent. Because today's millennials and younger, the what's becoming the bulk of the workforce, it's really important to them to be at companies that are, we've seen lots of studies about that are more on the leading edge, that are doing exciting things, that are doing new things, that aren't stuck in old ways of doing things. So you can very often find you can get better talent for the same price than by having innovation going on at your company. And maybe innovation that relates to the future of work and how your employees are actually getting their work done. But it may also just be that your company is innovating its methods of delivering for customers, and just being a part of that can be exciting. And that's something that also helps attract talent. So those are some of the reasons, and it's a lot of reasons, right, why innovation is potentially important for a business. And, I feel like maybe, I'm going to just skip past this. Sorry for that. Yeah. And, I should maybe just say, well, I think you probably feel you have an intuitive sense of what I mean when I say innovation. But just again, because of my point earlier about worthless words, not wanting to leave it undefined, I think innovation is really just a very simple idea. Innovation is doing something that's new, that's successful. Right now, an innovation process isn't always successful. But when someone says, we've created an innovation, by the time you really call it an innovation, it's presumably something that's really delivering value for your business, for your customers, or for whoever the sort of target is of that innovation. If it's your employees, for example, or your vendors, or your partners, or your suppliers, or your distribution chain, whatever it may be, that it's working, and also that it's somewhat significant. And we'll talk a little bit about tiers of innovation. But if something is just a teeny tiny improvement, that might be a good thing, but we generally wouldn't call it innovation. And this is a very simple definition. I wouldn't get too hung up on some fancy, elaborate definition of innovation. If you're trying something new, it's working, and it's at least some level of significance, I think you're innovating. And the funny thing is, as simple as that is, it's so hard for many organizations to really get that going, because it's easy to get stuck in certain ways of doing things. And anytime you want to make a change, you can find that there's resistance. So let's go back to, I was looking through my OneNote in preparing for wanting to talk about this, and I want to get to the 10 things. So I'm just going to do this part really quickly. But I was actually looking for my list of the 10 things, and I use Microsoft OneNote I have like thousands and thousands of documents in my Microsoft OneNote. Every time I think of something, I write it down, and sometimes I never get back to it, So I found something from like 3 years ago that I wrote down: 3 signs you might be faking innovation at your company. And I thought I'd share it with you. I want to be completely transparent with you and say, I have no idea how this information got into my Microsoft OneNote. One possibility is I woke up in the middle of the night and thought of it and wrote it down. Equally possible, I was listening to someone's podcast, or I was at a conference and I heard someone say it and I thought that's good stuff, and I wrote it down. So I swear, I really just don't know where this came from. So I'm not going to try to take credit for this. It might have been my own invention, or it might not. But in any case, I read it and I thought that's good stuff. I'm going to share it with you guys. So here are the 3 signs that you might be faking innovation, because I think there are a lot of people who have that sinking feeling, right? Like your company might be talking about innovation. It's a buzzword, your CEO might be saying to the shareholders, our company is dedicated to innovation. It might even be in your mission statement, but are you really doing it? Or is it just something you like to talk about? So here are 3 signs straight from my scrawled Microsoft OneNote that you might be faking innovation. The first is that what you call innovation are all safe bets. Everything that's in your portfolio of new ideas is all stuff that's clearly going to work. It's not ambitious. They're not really big ideas. They're just kind of little improvements to what you have going on. Now, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with optimizing things. That's just not the same thing as innovation. So if everything in your innovation portfolio seemed like simple, straightforward, safe bets, then you're probably slapping the word innovation on stuff that's, doesn't quite reach that threshold. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do those things, but you might want to ask yourself, what would be the impact on our business if, in addition, we were to go for some bigger ideas? Because usually innovations have a much weaker percentage hit rate. Many innovations fail, but often those that are successful can redefine a whole company. The second is, I love this phrase, big hat, no cattle, right? This is a Texan phrase. And it's this phrase that makes me think maybe didn't come from me, because it's not a phrase I use regularly. But, in Texas, they say if they see you walking around with a big cowboy hat, they think that maybe you're a poser. Maybe you are a fake cowboy. So somebody who's got big hat, no cattle in Texas and maybe elsewhere is somebody who, likes to walk the walk, but actually doesn't really have the herd. And so what would be the equivalent of that? Well, it's people who talk a lot about innovation, but when you say, okay, so where are your investments? Where are your projects? Where are the things you've brought to market? 3M and other companies that are really dedicated to innovation, they have benchmarks. They say, every year we want 30% of our products to be products that were invented in the last 3 years, or similar types of rules that they want to follow, goals they want to hit. So you want to look at a company and look at your own company and say, how much of what we're doing today really is something that came out of an innovation process? And if you've got a lot of talk, you've got an innovation lab, you've got a head of innovation, you've got people talking innovation, but if you look at what's actually happening, you don't see a lot of it, you might be a victim of the big hat, no cattle method of faking innovation. And then the third one is this idea, innovation is everyone's responsibility. Now, sometimes you hear that, leaders are telling their organization, we're all innovators. Every single one of you is an innovator. And, on the one hand, there's nothing wrong with that message. Actually, I really do believe that the companies that are the most successful at innovation do utilize every single person in your organization to feed the innovation process, meaning every single person you have on the front line, every person in your call center, every person in your store, every person in your factory, they're seeing things. They have observations about opportunities to improve, opportunities to change the game that you want to feed into an innovation process. But if that's the whole story, if the entirety of your innovation staffing approach is, we're just going to tell everyone in the company that innovation is their responsibility, and you think that you'll get innovation out of that, that's like saying the whole world is my garden, Okay, that's called not having a garden, right? So while we want innovation on one level to be everyone's responsibility, companies, and you'll see this in the maturity model I'm going to talk about in a moment, clearly have people who also are focused on it. It's their day job. It's what they wake up in the morning thinking about, versus everybody else who should also have that in the back of their minds, ideally always looking for opportunities, but obviously they probably have another day-to-day responsibility. And you don't want that to be your only method of staffing innovation. So anyway, those were the three things that were in my OneNote document, 3 signs you might be faking innovation. So with that, and we already talked about what is innovation. One last thought before I dive in on the assessment model, which is there are tiers of innovation. I said earlier that, innovation is at least defined as something that has some level of significance. If I change the brand of paper clips we're using, it's probably not innovation, even if it's new and even if it's better, But nevertheless, not all innovations are the same level of impact. There are incremental innovations, a big new idea, but what is it really? It's maybe it's a way of queuing people up at the bank in a more effective way. It doesn't change the business, but it could be significant. It could have a noticeable impact on customer satisfaction and could be a better approach. But nevertheless, it's still an incremental one. The second is adjacent. Adjacent is when you say, well, for example, you come up with a new product. Maybe you're a company that makes, eye makeup, and you've got a huge line of eye makeup, and all of a sudden you decide to move into another type of cosmetic, right? It's an adjacent space. You're moving into a new space. It's not what you're already doing, so it is something new and hopefully significant, but it's also very connected to what you're already doing. It's an expansion of something you're already doing. And then the third are truly transformational innovations. That's when a company like Netflix that's in the DVD by mail business says, we're going to create a streaming business. That's when a company really reinvents itself, or at least creates a new product or a new offering that is truly not just an extension of what they're already doing, but is moving into a whole new space. So you might want to think about those 3 tiers of innovation. And one thing I always like to think about when you're thinking about funding innovation is maybe you want a balanced portfolio. If you're looking at your stocks, you're probably thinking about some lower risk stocks and some higher risk stocks for your own personal financial planning. And similarly, if you're thinking about innovation, very often it makes sense to have some innovations that are maybe quicker, easier to implement, maybe a little less risky, but things that are, new ideas to just improve what you're already doing. And then some that move you into some new areas, and then at least a few sort of moonshot ideas that, if they're successful, have the potential to transform your company, to 10x your company, that sort of thing. Okay, so let's talk about the innovation maturity model. So what I did here is I just pasted in something from a forum. We've collected data for over 7 years from companies about where they stand on their innovation maturity model, and we use the data to help benchmark companies that we work with. So I thought I would just go through the 10 key areas of our innovation maturity model. And there's all kinds of analysis we do with this data, but at the very most basic level, it's just a framework to say, well, let me think about these 10 areas surrounding company. How are we doing in these 10 areas? Rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, and then, add it up just to get a sense. We don't find companies very often that are a 5 out of 5 in all 10 of these categories, which would be like a 50. But we do find companies that are in the high 30s and low 40s sometimes. These are companies that are, really, really innovation oriented. And of course, we find a lot of companies that are like down in the teens, right? 15, 16, 20, which means they're mostly 1s and 2s. And those are companies where there's a lot of upside opportunity. One thing I always say, whenever you benchmark something, just bear in mind that the lower the score you get, look at it this way: all the success that you're getting today in your company is despite potentially having a low score on an innovation maturity model, if that's where you are, which means you only have headroom. You could only be more successful if you were to focus on improving this area. So let me just run through what these 10 areas are. And I wanted you to think about it as questions to ask yourself. And while you're listening to this, maybe you just want to jot this down and note take. Give yourself a score on a scale of 1 to 5. From it's a major enabler of innovation for your company. I mean, this is really working well, and it's really supporting true innovation at your company at any of the tiers that I just talked about, all the way down to it's a major barrier. Because we don't have this, it's really holding us back. And then obviously you've got a few gradients in between. So that's kind of the scale. 1 is a major barrier to innovation. A 5 is a major enabler of innovation, and a 3 is we're okay. It's neither 1 nor a 5, but at least we're doing something. And obviously you can figure out what 2 and 4. So let's just talk about the 10 areas. Cultural value. Is innovation seen as important as the company? If you asked your typical employee, how important is it? How much message has there been from the top? Now, as I mentioned earlier, if that's all you do, then you're potentially the big hat and no cattle, right? So clearly this one is not the only, you can't just do this one and be successful, but it's still important. It's still important that the organization culturally understand that innovation is key to what that company is all about. So that's the first one. The second is role definition. This is sort of what I was saying earlier about, innovation is everybody's responsibility. Yes, but are there specific people who are clearly accountable for driving innovation in sufficient quantity to be effective? And, I don't even care whether you call it innovation. You might say, well, we don't have a chief innovation officer, but we have a chief transformation officer. It doesn't matter to me. The words don't matter. The real question is, are there people, if you have an R&D department, they're probably heavily involved in being responsible for driving some level of innovation. And then the question you want to ask is, okay, I have an R&D department. Is it sufficient quantity to be effective? If you're a 40,000 person organization and you have a 3-person R&D department, I'm guessing it's not sufficient unless those 3 people are quite extraordinary. So of course, it's not all about headcount, but really the question on role definition is, do you have people who are charged with driving it, who are measured on driving innovation, and is there a sufficient capacity there? The third is performance management. Are contributions by individuals to innovation measured and rewarded? If somebody in the warehouse comes up with an idea for a better way to run the manufacturing line that potentially might be a significant investment, but could massively improve the productivity and therefore lower your cost, is that the kind of thing that someone's writing down, measuring? Are there some understood goals around that? Or is it just like, hey, thanks for the suggestion, but by the time it gets rolled out, we've probably forgotten about the guy who mentioned it in the first place? Because of course, when people realize to this idea that we talked about earlier, innovation being everyone's responsibility, when people feel like they're going to be acknowledged and rewarded for their contribution, that it's actually a legitimate part of their job, they're much, much more likely to generate that type of information. And that's really essential because while it's great to have teams, it's essential to have teams that are driving innovation. You need those sensors out in the organization that are identifying where those opportunities are, whether it's sensors that are facing to customers or sensors that are facing to your manufacturing or service delivery processes or IT or marketing or whatever the case may be. So that's performance management. And again, just ask yourself, is this a major enabler? Yep, we've got a program, people know about it, and it really gets people to contribute. That sounds like it could be a 5. Or is it, yeah, we really have nothing, and frankly, we're getting nothing. Or is it somewhere in the middle? Well, we try to acknowledge people, but sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But it's still some people give us their ideas and suggestions. That's what. All right, let's keep moving. Number 4, risk tolerance. The company has a willingness to take the risks necessary to achieve innovation and will accept some degree of failure as part of the innovation process. This is so essential. Some organizations, I'll go so far as to say many organizations, have like a funding process. So let's say someone has an idea for something that's a potential new product or potential innovation to your service delivery or what have you. And implementing it's going to cost $1 million, let's say. But if it's successful, it could be $100 million savings. But let's face it, it's a new idea. It's not something that's been tried before. You can't really prove that it's going to be successful. And maybe you can't even really prove for sure what the impact is going to be. You can have your intuition about it, but it's new, so you just don't have the data. You can't really prove the outcome. Well, there are some organizations that will always say, no, we don't want to make investments where we don't know what the outcome will be. We only want safe bets, right? That was one of our signs that here innovation, that you're faking innovation, right? Or maybe you're not even faking it. Maybe you're not even trying to say you're innovating. Problem is today, companies that are successful, the companies that have growth, that have high levels of customer loyalty, they're almost all companies that have been driving real innovation. But most innovations fail. And the only way to really have a culture that can deliver innovations, look at how many projects get killed at Google. It's a huge percentage of things that are going on there. You may only become aware as a consumer of new products they bring to market, but it's a tiny, tiny fraction of all the things that are generated, ideated, built in the lab, and potentially some of those then even get brought to market and then get killed later. And so in order to be successful at innovation on any predictable, consistent basis, you have to be willing to fail. And many organizations have too low of a risk tolerance. So this is a key one. And this is probably one of the most significant ones that I see as a major barrier to innovation. Number 5, budget. Is funding available for early stage innovation? And is corporate investment obtainable for worthy later stage innovation projects? So to some degree, this goes together with the risk tolerance, right? If there's no risk tolerance, they're probably not making the budget available. But in addition, some companies, they say, well, we have risk tolerance, but then when you look at the actual budget available, it's not there. Or they may have money for mature ideas where we've already done a business case and a proof of concept and done some customer research. And now we can say, well, we have this thing that we want to fund to actually say, bring it to market from a pilot perspective. But is there money for what has to come before that? Is there money for generating ideas? Is there money for, spitballing things? Is there money for bringing people together in workshops? Is there money available to generate ideas from the field? Things like that. Or, it could be the opposite. It could be we generate all kinds of ideas. We're willing to fund that. But when it comes time to really take some of those ideas and put serious money behind them and bring them to market, we tend to not have the funding available. So I'd say a little bit kind of connected to the issue of risk tolerance, but making sure you're both willing to tolerate the risk as well as put your money where your mouth is. Number 6 is process. Does the organization have a method and process for gathering ideas that could drive innovation to determine which ones should move through being prototyped, being tested, being piloted? Of course, depending on the nature of your business, your process may be a little bit different, but mature organizations have what's called an innovation pipeline. And all that means is it's like a funnel. And at any given moment in time, you have large numbers of new ideas that are being generated, probably some every day, new possibilities. And the many of those ideas are probably lousy ideas. But in the midst of them, there could be some gems, some things that could change the game for your whole company. There was a time at Apple where someone, maybe Steve Jobs, I don't know, had that initial idea, let's create the iPhone. Obviously not a fully formed idea the way the product was wound up being launched. But at some point that was just a little, something scrawled on a cocktail napkin or something, right? But there was a process to gather those kinds of ideas and then to filter through them and decide which ones are worth taking to the next step, which ones are worth discussing, which ones are worth spending a few weeks exploring, then which of those are worth spending a few months prototyping, and which of those are worth spending 6 to 9 months bringing a pilot to market, or whatever your process is. But the point is you need a process. Mature companies say, yeah, we have a 5-step process or a 7-step process, and here's how it works, and here's who drives it, and here's how we track the progress of things through the process, et cetera. So ask yourself, do we have a process, or is it just haphazard? Is it just, well, if someone has an idea, they can ask their manager, and the manager can try to bring it up in a leadership meeting, and maybe someone will get interested in it. That's not a process. And that, again, like the flower in the middle of the field, you can have a successful innovation if you lack a process, but it's not mature and it's not reliable and predictable. Number 7 is collaboration. Both politics and defined processes support cross-division department collaboration, because most of the time, the vast majority of the times, innovation isn't just within one area. For example, it's not only IT. It's not only a product issue. There might be a technology component, a marketing component, a manufacturing component, a legal component. In order for real innovation to be brought to market, stuff that changes the game, you almost always have to have many parts of an organization working together. Because if you look at what you already do as an organization, most companies have sort of divided themselves up into different teams based on how you accomplish whatever you do today, right? If you are a company that makes cans of soup, you have groups of people who are responsible for, the recipes and the cooking of the soup and the canning of the soup and the shipping of the soup to stores. And each of those are different teams. But if you say, hey, let's innovate, let's create something different. Let's create, a spaghetti sauce. Well, now you've got the need to think about, well, is that going to go in a can, or is it going to go in a jar? Is it going to get shipped in the same way? Maybe not. Maybe it needs to be refrigerated. Is it going to use the same process for being cooked, or does it need something different? And now you need to pull all those different groups together. So you have to have some method for doing that. If you don't have it, it's very hard, because one group, remember one big company I worked with, the leader of marketing we would generate ideas for customer experience improvements, which is something that they wanted. But he would always talk about this idea of the sphere of my control. He would say, if you have an idea that just involves marketing, it's to better emails or something better on the website, great, let's move forward with that. But if you have an idea that now is going to require something different in the store, or something different even if it's just like a label or a sign, it's like that's not his area of responsibility. And now he's got to go work with another part of the organization. And he knew from experience that was going to be a huge hassle. So he would rather just focus on the stuff that he can do within his area of the organization. Now, I don't necessarily fault him, because in his case, he may have learned that if he tries to do things that cut across the organization, nothing gets done, and it's not a worthwhile place to put his efforts. And so he just focuses on what he can innovate within his one silo. But the problem is many of the big ideas have to cut across. And it's not necessarily his fault that there wasn't that cross-organizational collaboration process. But lacking that, he really couldn't or didn't think it was prudent to put energy into things that required that kind of collaboration, because there wasn't a good way of getting it done. In contrast, in organizations that have a way of doing that, an idea can come forth that requires many different divisions or departments or whatever it may be to work together. And that's something that's practical and doable. Okay, rounding the corner here, just 3 more. Number 8 is insight. One thing we talk about a lot, I talk about in my book, Winning Digital Customers, which you can get a free chapter of, by the way, if you go to wdc.ht/chapter. Janice, maybe you can put that URL up on the screen to remind everybody. I want to encourage everyone to check that out. But we talk about ideation and how great ideas are generated. A lot of innovation comes from ideas, comes from opportunities that someone identifies, or from a solution to an opportunity that someone identifies. These are all ideas. And ideas are generally based on insight, knowledge. Where do you come up with ideas for new things that customers might want? Well, usually from knowledge of what customers need, from knowledge from what gaps are, points of customer pain or dissatisfaction. How do you figure out what new product you could create to fill that dissatisfaction? Well, very often it's from knowledge, like knowledge of what the new technologies, knowledge of AI and what it's capable of, or knowledge of plastics and how you can manufacture things, or knowledge of what a retail store will permit you to do if you work with them and come up with a promotional campaign. Or, of course, the examples are endless, but the point is, ideas often come from that underlying knowledge. So is there adequate information about competitors, customers, market trends, technology, or whatever to stimulate innovative thinking? You need a process to make sure that information is available to whoever it is that you want to come up with the ideas that are going to drive your innovation. And again, you're going to rate yourself and just ask, are you thinking, hell yeah, we've got that in spades. Like there's tons of information anytime I want it available to me, and it is absolutely not a barrier. In fact, it's a major enabler. Great, that's a 5. if you're sitting there thinking, gosh, I don't have any of that. Yeah, I'd have no way of knowing what my customers are or aren't satisfied with, or any of those things that I just talked about. And obviously you need to apply them. You may not have manufacturing if you're an insurance company, but you have something comparable. Maybe you have claims or you have underwriting. If you really don't have any information and it's really holding you back, well, then that's a 1. And obviously you have some options in the middle if it's somewhere between those two polar ends. Number 9, environment and tools. The physical environment is conducive to collaboration, and equipment, software, other tools that support innovation are reasonably available or attainable. Now, we've been using these questions for 7 years. Of course, in the middle of COVID, it tends to be a little bit less about genuine physical environment, since people are all working remotely, or by and large, although probably we're going to shift back to some more in-person collaboration, I would imagine, as things get better. In my case, part of my business is we own a facility in Manhattan called the Innovation Loft. You can learn more about it if you like at innovationloft.com, which is a workshop facility where we bring people together for creative collaboration and brainstorming. And the reason I'm mentioning it here is because not only do we have a process for helping people do these things that they go through when they come to one of our workshops, but we also have an environment that's been built. It's a workshop environment with big whiteboards and magnetic tiles and art supplies, and it's an inspiring environment full of reference materials and books and other things to stimulate you and to make it very easy for people to get their ideas out there, to see them all around them, to prioritize them, and to collaborate. So if you give people tools, if you give teams those kinds of tools, that's an enabler, right? And if they don't have those tools, can they still be successful? Can they scrawl it on a Post-it note? I mean, yeah. Again, you don't have to have a 5 out of 5 in every one of these areas, but the more of this you have, the more you're enabling people. And then there are other kinds of tools, software tools, collaboration tools. Certainly, most companies now have tools like WebEx or Zoom for that type of collaboration, but there's other tools you can use on top of them. Things like Miro boards, which if you're not familiar, is just a collaborative whiteboarding space, which is much, much better than what you get built into any of the conferencing platforms like Zoom or WebEx or anything. Or tools for idea management. Companies like Spigot and Bright Idea make what are basically database tools, so that if you are generating ideas for something, you have a place to store them and organize them, where other people can see them and comment on them and vote on them. Those are just helpful enablers. Again, you can do it without those tools, but they make the process easier. And the last category is training. So if you think about all the things I've talked about, whether it's using environments and tools, or having a process that people have to follow, or knowing how to collaborate, or figuring out how to gather the insight information, all of these things are things which people need to be trained at some level to do. And so just know that innovation is a skill. And like any skill, are there people who can pick it up on their own? Are there people who can watch a YouTube video and figure it out? Yes, definitely. But for most people, if you want them in the workplace to start to use a new skill, you got to find a way to teach them that skill, whether it's by bringing in someone to run training sessions like we do for companies, or whether it's by sending them to conferences or giving them books or reading materials or something, or a train the trainer model where you train 30 people and each of those 30 people then train their teams. We've done that at companies as well. So there are many ways to do it, but having people trained in innovation and not thinking of it as some kind of magic process that only geniuses do, but something anybody can do, but that not everybody has the skills, or not everyone is practiced in how to do it, and that it's something that you can train people up to do. And once you do, well, you're going to get more results out of it. So that is what I wanted to share with you about the 10 key ways to measure your maturity around innovation. Hopefully that's useful. And we will try to make some, you can obviously see the questions on the video. I'll try to see if we can't get a PDF or something attached in the, depending on which platform you're on, if we can attach something. But I know people watch this from I think we're on 4 or 5, whatever it is, Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn, and I think somewhere else as well. So in any case, wow, storm's kicking up outside. In any case, hopefully that's useful to you. But even if you just scrub through the video, you can see what those questions are and just jot it down. You don't need a fancy tool. Just jot it down and see where you score. And you know what? Post in the comments. I'd love to know what kind of score you get for your company. And by the way, I would add that one thing that we like to do, sometimes we'll use a survey tool to use this survey at a given company. And one of the things that we like to look at is, as we look at the scores, we look across roles and across departments, because sometimes we find the scores are different. We find that in IT, they have different pattern of which of these 10 areas they feel they're strong and weak versus, say, in marketing or in manufacturing or in operations or another area. And that's interesting because, well, it may very well be that there's different practices or even different cultures in some of those different areas of one organization, one company, if it's a largish company. And that's very interesting, because if we discover that the folks in IT feel that they're getting excellent innovation training, but the folks in marketing say they're not, naturally the first thing you want to know is, oh, well, what are they doing in IT? Maybe there's something we can just, copy paste and be doing in another area. If they have great tools in operations, are those tools that are available to everybody else and they just don't know about them? If so, the solution may be easier than you think. So certainly always good to not only do it for yourself, but potentially do it. And if you want our help, by the way, we can help you. We have a tool that we use to do this at companies, and it's no big deal, really. It's just a survey you send out, and then we analyze the results. But as you see what the questions are. You could probably do it yourself in SurveyMonkey or what have you. And but again, I would look at, you want to just do it for yourself, like we've been talking about. It's helpful to do it and see what the aggregate scores are across a few hundred people across your organization, as well as then start to slice that up and say, is the perspective any different by level within the company? Does senior executives have a different view? It's always interesting if senior executives think the company's doing great, but all the people at the ground level who actually have to implement give it a much lower score. It's very telling, right? It usually means the senior executives may be drinking their own Kool-Aid a little bit. And then in fact, it's really not as rosy at the ground level, but maybe that information is not bubbling up to the C-suite. And that's one of the reasons why a tool like this, simple though it is, can be very useful in making sure you're getting a good, perspective on it. So, I just noticed a question. Oh, Gulshan Oshan. Hey, Gulshan, how you doing? So good to hear from you. He asked a question. I realized it was 20 minutes ago. So I don't know if if he's even still on, but it says in his question, is attracting talent less important when businesses, I didn't know you could put a question like that up. Cool. Is attracting talent less important when businesses can pay for outcomes as opposed to hiring talent to take on the risk of achieving the same outcome? Let me read that again and see if I understand the question. Is attracting talent less important when businesses can pay for outcomes as opposed to hiring talent to take on the risk of achieving the same outcome? I think talent's always critical. I think that if you think about what is a business really, it's nothing more than the interface between, it's just an exchange of value. And the exchange of value is between the people who work for or with the business, meaning they could be employees or they could be contractors or suppliers, whatever, but whoever is sort of driving the business, and whatever the customer is that has needs, who are paying for whatever the business is providing. A business is just an exchange of value. So, unless your business is a pure commodity, your business is, hey, I have an iron ore mine, and you can go get your own iron ore, and that's the entire business, and there's no human component. And of course, there are very few, probably no businesses that are purely that. There's always an important component of the human element of innovation, and not just innovation, customer service, and a wide range of other things. And so I think that attracting talent is always really important. And, when you talk about paying for outcomes, I'm not 100% sure I know what you mean, but I'm guessing that you mean, for example, if instead of hiring an employee full-time, I'm paying people on commission, or I'm paying people in some other way so that I'm only paying people when they deliver a result. Well, I would argue that attracting talent is just as important, maybe even more important then. When you have let's just take an example. When you have a commissioned salesperson role, you could take the mindset that says, well, I don't care if we attract some bad salespeople because, well, the bad salespeople, they won't be delivering any money for me. But on the other hand, I won't be paying them because they'll get no commissions. That may be true, but you're still generating leads. You're still doing marketing. You're still spending money to drive customers to these bad salespeople who then are presumably squandering it. And furthermore, what's really critical is attracting the right people, because if you have a lousy product, for example, that no one wants to sell on commission because they can't make good money, and therefore you're not attracting top talent, you're not going to get your outcome. Just because you can pay for your outcome, you're paying on a per outcome basis. If you attract people who don't deliver the outcome, well, okay, you might not be paying. Great, you're not paying, but you're not getting your outcome. Now, how important is your outcome? Well, if your outcome is sales, or your outcome is bringing new products to market that are going to make or break your company in the marketplace next year, it's extremely important, right? It's extremely important, no matter how you're compensating someone. So I sort of thought that through as I talked it out. But I would say, I do believe it's just as important, maybe even more important, when you're trying to attract people on some kind of performance basis, to make sure you attract the right people. And the good news is that when you are in a position to attract the right people, and then you have a performance basis, what's great is you can be unlimited, right? Because you don't worry about how many people are out there generating revenue. If you're operating a commission sales situation, and you can attract even more people because what you're offering is such a great experience or a great product that they're going to be able to make money on, well, you're probably going to do even better because you're going to attract even more of them, and you're only going to pay them for outcomes. So, that can be a fantastic thing. But again, you've got to attract them, and you're not attracting them with money, right? You're only attracting them with being paid for the outcome. So you better make sure that they're going to get their outcome, or they're not going to hang out either. So anyway, Gulshan, awesome to hear from you. Hopefully that answered your question. Thanks for anyone else. We are definitely at time. So I see there's a couple of questions, but we won't be able to get to them, but we will go over them. And if they are things that make sense to answer in future live casts, we absolutely will. So again, happy Thanksgiving, and welcome to the last little stretch of our year before we get into the new year. So hopefully you're all getting excited and gearing up towards 2021. I know I am looking forward to a better 2021. And with that, have an awesome day, and I will see you guys on Wednesday at 10 a.m. for the next live cast.